Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am here with my guest today, Matt Zemon, who I am so looking forward to delving into this conversation, which is an area that is going to be expanding as my professional lens and offerings. So this is one of the first big conversations I've had about psychedelics on the podcast. So Matt, thank you so much for joining me. Would you please introduce yourself and let us know your journey? How did you get to where you are and doing what you do and how you show up in the world?
Oh, thank you for all this. And I appreciate you having me on today, Jory. This is exciting. So I have a book called Psychedelics for Everyone. And then I have another one called Beyond the Trip, which is a preparation and integration journal. But how I got here is kind of a convoluted path. I was an entrepreneur for many, many years. And a few years ago, some friends invited me to do a guided psilocybin or magic mushroom journey. I was never a drug person. So that was just not in my wheelhouse. And I didn't really want to do it, but they said it's going to be good for me. And I love learning. And this is a way to learn about myself. And I love to travel. And this is a journey in my mind. I'm going to love it. So I did it. And it completely changed the way I look and interact with the world. In that first session, I reconnected with my mom. She passed when I was 22. She was 49.
Wow.
And and I could pull a string from like her to me to my kids and just realized, oh my God, she's not gone. She's just in a different place. And I felt so incredibly safe and loved. And then I realized, wow, I don't feel safe and loved in my everyday life. And how can I change that? And that led me to go back to school to get a master's in psychology and neuroscience, focused in on psychedelic medicine. And then that has led to really an understanding much more of the spiritual connection of psychedelics and getting more involved in that aspect of my journey is much more in the spiritual path these days, but doing a lot of work in between the medical and the academic as well.
I think there's such beautiful overlap that we're beginning to know how to integrate more between the spiritual and the scientific, that we cannot keep them at separate ends, but rather the more we can integrate them, the greater we can heal.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Ultimate of that mind-body connection, right?
It is. It's funny. I mean, it's like our culture is kind of the first culture in ever that has separated the role of healer and spiritual person. And because of that, our medical people are, we're pure science. Well, great. And you might know a lot about our bodies and our brains, but in brushstrokes, they don't know a lot about the spiritual world. And conversely, it's a fair argument to say, okay, well, spiritual people, how do you keep us safe when we're talking about drugs, medicine, sacraments, whatever you want to call them? And there's things that the spiritual world can adopt from the medical world, but it's both. It's a combination of spiritual and medical that I think makes this an incredibly interesting process.
Yeah, and it's something that is new for many people to even consider. And for some, it might feel super out there and woo, and yet we're talking about some of the most basic foundations of mindsets of our entire world, right? We go back to contemplative, ancient traditions, and this isn't new. It's the medical part, the scientific part that's new, yet we in the Western culture here tend to hold that a higher value because it's been scientifically proven.
Absolutely. I think people are surprised. I don't think people understand how long humans have been using psychedelics. I mean, there's a cave drawing in Algeria with this mushroom shaman. He's got mushrooms going all down his side. He's holding a couple mushrooms in each hand. So that's somewhere between 5,000 and 9,000 years old. And we have the Eleusinian mysteries, 2,000 years of psychedelic use in Greece.
It's wild.
And all over the world. Siberia has shamans using mushrooms. I didn't know any of this until we dove into this world.
Yeah, it's wild. It makes me think about when I started, much of my focus is on mindfulness and meditation. And when I went through my MBSR training and, really the concept of it was Western science and people wanting to understand, how does meditation work? Why is it good for me? Like, I'm only going to do something that I know is scientifically proven to be worth my while or worth my time. And yet, here's this ancient contemplative practice that for 3,000 years, people didn't need to understand what was happening in the brain to know that it worked. But we need to, in our Western culture, understand it, which now I love that there's this beautiful overlap where we can truly understand what's happening in the brain with psychedelics, but then our experiential understandings is much richer.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way to say that.
Yeah. So one of the things you said in your intro was, I was never a drug person. And I love that you named that, because this is a newer world for me as well. And I have also never been a drug person. And I think there's a differentiation when we're talking about psychedelics in two things. One, are we talking about plant medicine versus drugs that one might think of when they think of drugs, but also, are we using it for recreational or for healing? So as you are a self-proclaimed not a drug person and a proponent of psychedelics, help explain to someone who's listening, what do you actually mean by that? Because it might sound like a foreign concept to say. It feels like an oxymoron.
It is. And the word drug by itself carries a lot of baggage. I mean, where do we separate drugs from things like coffee and caffeine or a vitamin? What's the difference? I think all of us who grew up kind of born 1971 until recently, we had drilled into our head, just say no. These are drugs.
Just say no.
It's going to fry your brain, no medical use. And I believed it. That campaign worked on me.
Worked on me too. Thank you, Nancy Reagan.
Exactly. And then I've been floored to learn that it wasn't based on science. It was based on politics. And I'm frustrated to have learned what I've learned at this point. That we had 1,000 papers on the efficacy of psychedelics before 1970, and we just turned off the research. That we've allowed our culture to go into this antidepressant, anti-anxiety, mood stabilizing, ADHD medicine prescribed left and right to kids and adults, that it becomes a lifetime sentence, when psychedelics have much less in the world of side effects is not a lifetime sentence. And it's just frustrating.
It's incredibly frustrating. And many people don't even realize that the efficacy of antidepressants isn't even that high.
Yeah, we're talking about roughly 40%. And that's at a high number. And on top of that, what's not shown or told or talked about regularly in the list of side effects are things like, okay, they might say, okay, you might have some sexual dysfunction. We use that as an example. They don't say 73% of the people who take this antidepressant will have some form of sexual dysfunction. Weight gain, suicidal ideation, it goes on and on. The side effects are tremendous. So again, if antidepressants work for you and you're listening to this, that's great. There's no pill bashing, no shaming, none of that. But if they don't work for you, that's not you failing the medicine. That's the medicine failing you. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to tell anybody to do anything. I'm here to talk about how psychedelics have worked with me. I can talk about the research. I can talk about what I've seen. But everybody has to make their own decision on what's right for them, which brings you all the way back to this feeling about drugs. I was scared going into this. I did not like the idea of putting a substance in my body. I wasn't even a big drinker for pretty much that same reason. And now I'm going to go on a 6-hour journey where I have not control of myself. Terrified.
Your story resonates so much with me. That was exactly my experience. So let's talk a little bit about the experience piece.
Sure.
Before getting into the research piece. I think having the experiential knowledge to help people who might be considering this or might be hearing more about it, right? We're having this psychedelic renaissance right now. It's kind of everywhere. So if you're listening right now and it hasn't been within your realm of awareness, now that it is, you will hear about it everywhere, because that's also just how our brain works. The reticular activation system is turned on. So you're going to start hearing more and more about it. So will you share a little bit more about what your journeys looked like for you, what the experience of it was, but most importantly, what healing came of it?
So at this point, I've gone from not doing any drugs to doing a lot of them, and to working with different practitioners, from MDs and PhDs to shaman and indigenous leaders, and trying different medicines to see what they would feel like. So they all feel somewhat different. There's a difference between a psilocybin journey, which is 6 hours, versus a multi-day ayahuasca journey. Again, maybe 6-7 hours for the journey itself, but you're doing it 3 days in a row, and it's very physical, versus a ketamine journey, which is our only legal psychedelic here in America, which is about 45 minutes to an hour. Versus bufo, I'll throw one more out there, 5-MeO DMT, or the toad, and that's about 10 to 20 minutes. So these are all very different things. For me, the first and foremost thing that it does is it helps connect me to the notion of a higher power, into that we are all connected, the interconnectedness of all things. That is ground. That's absolutely essential for every experience. And then beyond that,
can I pause on that
absolutely.
for 1 second? I
Sure.
recently was watching a training course in which Dr. Andrew Weil was one of the head speakers, and he actually has a book coming out in 2024 on the interconnectivity that psychedelics offer to us as really the solution for saving our planet. Like, it's not a far stretch to say this is a catalyst to healing our planet, because as long as we see ourselves not just separate from one another, which we know that's hitting some pretty big heights over the past few years, but also as long as we're disconnected from our planet, we're not doing anything to help it. But to have what you said, that it connects us to a higher power, but our interconnectivity of all things, people may not really get the impact of that, but it's huge. And I really just want to point that out, because think about just in your day-to-day life, how often we're in a mindset of other, and what that does for us relationally, even if it's just with your barista at Starbucks, right? And imagine if that mindset of other is gone, and we are seeing one another as an extension of ourselves, from our heart, from a place of positive intent. Like, imagine just what could be the benefit and the ripple effect of that. And that's what you're speaking to.
Absolutely. That we might be an individual wave, but we're connected to the ocean, and we can see that.
I love that phrase.
It's that theme is a reoccurring theme for me in almost all psychedelics, or psychedelic experiences. And we have a culture of loneliness right now. We're a car culture here in this country. So it's like, we get up, we might have our family, for those of us who have families, but then we get in our car, we go to our office, we do our job, we come back, and we're back in our house. And there's a lot of loneliness out there.
A lot of isolation.
A lot of
especially post-COVID.
Yeah. And a lot of focus on material items. That's the culture we grew in. We grew up in a scarcity mindset where there's not enough. So we've got to work extra hard and make sure we get ours and save more than we need, so that we have enough, because someone might try to take it from us, or it's a very scarcity based mindset. And switching into kind of, I think what psychedelics show you is it's an abundant world. There is plenty. And there's no way to fail. We're only moving forward. So how do we want to spend our time moving forward? Knowing that there's enough out there. And it's nice to know that. Yeah.
So let's go through a couple of the different psychedelics that you have experienced. Again, speaking just, what it for someone who has never done this, what it might be like. You named a couple of different medicine there, but for someone who's still like we were in the beginning of, I'm scared to do this, walk through experientially what someone might be able to expect and then benefit from.
So let's kind of take this sequentially from easiest to do, easiest to get, to less. So right now, ketamine is legal in all 50 states. So
Mm-hmm.
you can go get a doctor to prescribe for depression or anxiety, ketamine. And this, you can take it intravenously. You can take it intermuscularly with a shot. You can even work with one of the telehealth companies and take it with a lozenge at home by yourself, or sorry, with a guy, with a sitter at home, but essentially by yourself. And these are 45-minute to an hour journeys where people feel like the weight of the world has been lifted off their shoulders. And people talk about kind of a ketamine tunnel where it takes you into a journey within, where you can have different insights, different thoughts, and process. And with ketamine, the way it works is typically, because it's a shorter dose and because of the way the medicine works, you're typically prescribed 4 to 6 sessions within 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. So you do that initial dosage. And again, there's no hangover. So many people will do it in the morning. They get up, they fasted all night, they'll have their ketamine, they'll have another hour or 2 hours to recover, and then they'll do a half day at work, or they'll go to work for half a day and then they'll do it, or they'll do it on a weekend. You do your 4 to 6 sessions, and then for many people, that's all you needed. You got through whatever it was you were processing, and you might not need it again. Others, they put you on some type of maintenance. Maybe it's once a month, once every 2 months during different episodes, but it's not an everyday pill like an antidepressant.
But so just to be clear, it is beneficial for depression.
Absolutely. That's why it's
kind of one of the hallmarks, right?
Absolutely. Depression, anxiety.
And the psychoactive experience of ketamine is what?
It's a dissociative anesthetic. So what does that mean? It means your body is going to feel heavier than on other psychedelics. You can move your legs, you just don't want to, as an example. You have visuals, you have more of a somatic experience with ketamine. But yeah, you can still have visuals, you can still have insights. It's a 45-minute to an hour journey. Versus I'm going to switch to MDMA for a moment, because this is the one that's about to become legal. So
yes!
It's very exciting.
So excited for this.
So we might have heard of it as ecstasy when we were younger. And again, I put all that with an asterisk that maybe what we had was, or people had, was pure MDMA, but it very well wasn't. It might have been sold as MDMA. That doesn't mean you had MDMA. So we're talking about pure MDMA. Phase 3.
It could be cut with other things, and
absolutely.
And people might have taken, with Molly or ecstasy, cut up with other things in pill form at a rave, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's when people think about it, that might be what their 20-something-year-old experience might have looked like, which was euphoric for being at a rave.
Absolutely. So what's happening with MDMA now is the phase 3 clinical trials are over. And for people with treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, so picture veterans or first responders or victims of sexual assault who have tried a number of different pharmacological solutions and talk therapies, and it hasn't worked. That's the population they were doing the studies on. 3 sessions of MDMA with therapy in advance and therapy after, and 67% no longer qualified as having PTSD. 88% had a clinical improvement in their symptoms. So the results
88%.
Yeah, it's a staggering
for those
number.
of you listening, understand, we said a few moments ago, antidepressants might only have a 40% efficacy rate. And now we're talking 88% no longer, 67 no longer PTSD, 88%
had a
relief of
symptoms. It's a big deal.
Huge deal.
So we expect MDMA to be legal in this country the end of this year, beginning of next. Australia actually just jumped ahead of us and legalized MDMA. Colorado and Oregon have decriminalized and are creating a medical model around this, jumping again ahead. But federally, this should be available. It's going to be expensive, but it's going to be possible. And then there are retreats and underground options for how to get MDMA illegally, which a number of people do because it is so effective. It's effective for individuals and it's effective for couples, which is super interesting.
Well, and originally how MDMA was designed was for couples therapy. And, one of the ways that it is so effective in couples is it allows you to have really difficult conversations without getting emotionally flooded. It elicits positive emotions so you can have the hard talks without getting defensive. And
Yeah.
I describe the experience of it of like you're standing in a room and it's all four walls come down and now you're just there. But the vulnerability is not making you want to hide or retreat. It's this full acceptance of not just you, but this other person in which their four walls have now come down. So talk about interconnectivity, right? It's you get direct access to that elicit of positive emotions, which without the flooding and defensiveness and the traumas preventing healing are hugely beneficial.
I love that. We there's two things I'll just compliment what you're saying. First, it's a heart opener. So you feel a lot of love for yourself and for others. And for some people, that love for yourself, that just feels good to remember that you can love yourself.
Yes.
And then it removes shame, blame, and guilt. And that's what opens up that ability to have these conversations. So yes, you can have incredible journeys with a mask on using MDMA or MDA, sassafras, and have visuals and have beautiful insight and open your heart. But you can also take that off and have conversations with your partner and move ground in a way that years of marriage therapy can't do.
So Matt, you're going to be a guest on my fiance's podcast as well in a short amount of time. And he and I broke up for a short period of time. And well, he broke up with me. Let's just be honest. I didn't want it, but he had the courage to, have us face what was not working. And MDMA and then psilocybin as well. But in the beginning, MDMA was a huge part of our healing journey together to reconcile, because it was never about not wanting to be together. It was never not about love. It was how do we overcome these challenges, some of which had to do with each other, but some of which were also deeply rooted, whether in our previous marriages or childhood. So, kind of dealing with our own personal shit that affects our relationality and, the deepest level of connection we were seeking. And with our dosage, it was not too psychoactive. Just to, again, give people the experience, definitely everything feels fuzzy. Touch feels really wonderful, but able to function in the world. Like I could be out in the world and no one might know that I was on MDMA. But again, that heart opening you mentioned and the ability to sustain difficult conversation was astounding for someone in my partner who he had generally a window of about 15 minutes before he would get flooded. Now we could have 3-hour conversations that not only were not flooding, but productive, that were left us in a more healed state. But what I loved about it was I was able to access that state moving forward. It wasn't just like a one and done. It was an embodied experience that I had a mental and emotional imprint that I could harness in the future.
And that's the other power of psychedelics, is what you just said, is it creates not just an imprint, but it reminds you, or we talk about all the time, you remember, I didn't always used to think like I have been thinking. I used to think like this. And I remember that I am worthy, that I'm loved, that I am enough, that I am able to have a conversation, that I'm not ashamed. And I can then, in the plasticity that follows the psychedelic experience, I can start using I can implement behavioral change. So I can't stress enough that psychedelics aren't a cure for anything. There is no pill, there is no magic that cures anything. It's a catalyst. It's a catalyst for change, and catalyst for connection. So I love that you've had such a positive experience in using it with a couple. And what that's meant for your relationship. That's beautiful.
And we've guided other couples in it. And just witnessing that transformation is the most beautiful expression of love of healing I've ever witnessed. And I've been doing therapy for a long time. There's this
incredible
other realization, that there's a limitation to talk therapy. And there's an absolute limitation to what we can access cognitively. And again, our society over attaches value and meaning to our cognitions, our intelligence, right? What is rational. And a lot of our emotional struggles aren't about what's rational. And so this is
yeah.
accessing a different level of consciousness to heal what we cannot cognitively just rationally prescribe a routine of healthcare and say you're fixed now, because we know that hasn't worked.
And we also know that, I mean, unless you have endless amounts of money and hours upon hours to get to the, oh, wait a minute, I'm feeling this because my parents got divorced in kindergarten and I saw this fighting and then this happened and I was scared and then I started changing my behavior to win love and on and on and on, and things that in a single journey on psilocybin or MDMA you can unpack so much of that and put it away.
Yeah. And it's actually healed.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it earlier, it's like months or years of therapy in one day, which, especially for those who've been suffering a very long time, what a beautiful opportunity for personal freedom.
Yeah, again, to remember who you are is a big deal. And as we get older, we all get into repetitive thought patterns. That's just how our brain works. And effectively, our neuron connections get pruned down and down and down. We operate very efficiently, but we literally are thinking the same way over and over. And people with severe depression and anxiety, that's even magnified even more. I'm going to and as a quick sidecar to this, the same thing happens with behaviors. We end up using different behaviors to self-soothe whatever these trauma. It's our coping mechanisms. So it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be sex, it can be gambling, it can be eating, it can be all sorts of things.
Denying, dismissing, ignoring that even are there, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then again with the psychedelics, it oftentimes shows us you didn't always think this way. This might be the origin of that. Can you put this away? Can you think about this differently? And maybe you don't need to do this behavior. So for a lot of people, there's a lot of work being done right now with alcohol and smoking and psychedelics. And I know for me, like I haven't had a drink of alcohol since my first psilocybin experience in 2019. It just fell off. But I know lots of people who went in with the intention of I need to curb my alcohol use, and it's worked. For heroin users, ibogaine is proving to be incredibly effective. For anyone in an opioid addiction.
I want to pin this question.
Sure.
About drug use and addiction and psychedelics. We'll come back to it because it's a whole nother tangent, but I want to be able to keep going through the psychedelics that we listed in the experiences. But just to add on one thing that you were just talking about, whether it's getting stuck in repetitive thought patterns or behavioral patterns, and how you mentioned that these were likely born out of, whether we want to call them lowercase t traumas or capital T traumas. I like to use the word strategies, but I think at the end of the day, we're all seeking to feel safe, emotionally safe, connected with others in a safe way. And we develop strategies when things aren't working. And I think another way of adding language to this is this helps us reshift those strategies, that we don't have to keep using the same strategy over and over and over again that's not working, that we otherwise don't feel we can't get out of that spiral. It's like these psychedelic journeys offer, oh, look, there's a whole other path you can walk down. And that's actually going to give you a different pathway to not have to need those strategies anymore, because it heals it from the root.
It heals it from the root. And for me, at least, I'll speak about myself. The strategy, I was always looking for external validation. And I would constantly move the goalpost over for what I needed to be. When I'm going to be happy is when this happens.
Oh,
that happens. And
I'd like all the listeners to raise your hand if you've ever said to yourself, I'll be happy when.
And it's incredible to see and then to know in a way that no one can tell you, but you can feel that you are perfect right now. You have things to work on, of course, but everything you need is inside of you right this second. And that's an incredible gift to be able to walk away from a psychedelic session with that knowing, that understanding.
Yeah, huge. priceless, really. So ketamine, you described MDMA. What would you say is next up on the tier?
I'm gonna go to psilocybin. You brought that up, just because so many people can get psilocybin easily. It grows everywhere. It's not very expensive. Uh, on the research side, amazing things. FDA has given it breakthrough therapy designation. There's beautiful work being done with like cancer patients, where no, it's not going to cure the cancer, but it's going to change the way that the people experience the last chapter of their life, and the way their family is going to interact with them. So that's beautiful. All sorts of things. Canada's got a program where they're giving exemptions. Incredible medicine, and for many people, they can get it easily in their town. So people are using it again for depression and anxiety, eating disorders, OCD. There's a psychedelic autism group that's using psilocybin and LSD, doing amazing things with that.
Oh, that's amazing. What I haven't heard about that yet. What are some of the results of what they're finding with psilocybin and autism?
So there's been an underground group for quite a while, like a Reddit group. You can find them. And it's fast. And sorry, now University of Toronto is agreeing to do research into it because it's been on the list of like, it's been so hard to get to do research on psychedelics, period, let alone with a group that's more challenging. But University of Toronto is stepping up and doing research. But when I've talked to some of the members of this group and said, what, you're autistic and you're doing psychedelics, what's going on? What they've told me is two things. One person said, I couldn't read other people's emotions until I had LSD. And then it just unlocked it for me. Everybody, I just didn't get social cues. These are adults. Yes, these are all adults I'm talking to.
Okay.
Yeah, it just
around what age was this person?
I'm guessing, and I'm so bad at this now, Jory, I'm guessing late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, it unlocked social cues. And then this other person of this group was talking about how he has a flat affect. And he is saying it was so much worse before psychedelics that, again, for him, he understood internally why it was important to express with his body what he was feeling, and understood how he could actually do that. And that's just, it's wild to me that,
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. So yeah, beautiful work there. There's if you look online in psychedelics and autism, you'll find a group out of Denver that's kind of heading this up and holding weekly or bi-weekly calls and all sorts of good. And they've got 2 books. It's incredible.
And you mentioned this.
Yeah, tell me.
I was just saying, you mentioned this with the MDMA piece. So ketamine is legal in all 50 states. MDMA hoping to be legalized, 2024-ish. Currently, psilocybin still illegal most everywhere. Legalized in both Oregon and Colorado. Am I correct in that?
It's decriminalized in a bunch of places.
Okay, so I know, like in the Bay Area, it's decriminalized in Oakland. So there's a place to be able to get it where you're not gonna get too much in trouble when the cop is parked next to your car outside.
Right, because they don't care when it's decriminalized for effectively. You asked about the experience with psilocybin. So when we talk about MDMA before, we were talking about like the heart opener. It can be visual, it can be connected. You feel a lot of love. Touch feels great. Psilocybin is more intense in my experience. It's more, you're grounded into the earth. And you feel this connection. So it's different. The other is heart. This is more mind, third eye type of experience. So you feel connected to all people and all things. You feel energetically connected. And then I talk about psilocybin as kind of like molecular cleaning. It's like the mushrooms are in there and they're trying to clean you at the root to work on whatever it is that you've set as your intention or the mushrooms want to show you. But it can be very intense. There can be a lot of crying. There can be a lot of laughter. There can be waves where you go back and forth between the few things. There can be really intense visuals. It's a beautiful, beautiful medicine. And again, especially in a ceremonial setting, it's incredible.
Well, and you mentioned something I just will say my personal experience is very similar to what you described. And for being someone who does not like being not in control, this has been a beautiful practice on recognizing how I can release that control and allowing the medicine to know what to do and to not over attaching to an agenda, clearly setting intentions of what am I here to heal, and then releasing the grip on what it's supposed to look like. And that in and of itself is a big piece of healing for me, and riding that wave. And the fact that this is indigenous plant medicine, the medicine knows. And I've seen this with myself. I've seen this with others that we've guided. Even if you think you know what you're there to do, it might have another plan for you. And to trust that's what needs to be arising. And which also speaks to an interesting question of, quote, like, is there a bad trip? Well, there might be an uncomfortable one, but usually there's psychological gold in that of, well, this is what I've been repressing, that I now have the freedom to feel, think, express, emote, release, purge, whatever it might be, even if it's not comfortable.
Yeah, that really resonates when we don't talk about bad trips. We talk about trips that are challenging. With one exception, though, we talk a lot about source, set, and setting.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you've paid attention to those three things, and I'll go into those here in just a second.
Yep, good.
Yeah, no bad trips, challenging trips.
Yes.
If you don't pay attention to source, set, and setting, there could be some really, really challenging, bad experiences. So source is, where did your medicine come from? Did you have it tested? Is it pure? Do you know what you have? So again, why do people work, whether it's with a medical professional or a trusted guide, shaman, whatever you want to call them? It's you know you're getting pure medicine. If you're not doing that and you're buying them on your own, please use Drug Checker, Dance Safe, get your drugs tested. If you can afford the drugs, you can afford to get them tested. Too much fentanyl is floating out there. It's not worth it. Set is your mindset. So whoever you're working with, whether it's medical or indigenous or anything in between, did they work with you in advance? Have they prepared you? Have you set your intentions? Did they tell you how long it's going to last? Did they tell you what it's going to feel like or could feel like? Did they set ground rules? Is there touching? Is there no touching? There could be 10 people in the room, 20 people in the room, 100 people in the room, 2 people in the room. Do you have music? No music. What are the rules? So that's all really important. Also, part of that is the medical intake. Did whoever is working with you, did they get a full medical intake? Not because they want to say no to you, but because they want to keep you safe. And there are people who have certain taking prescriptions or supplements or have prior history in their family or history in themselves that certain medicines aren't a good fit for.
Yeah, those contraindications are important to recognize. They're very real.
Yeah, and I mean, just on the top, just for today, if you're on antidepressants and you can do ketamine, mostly you can do psilocybin in most cases. You cannot do MDMA. You cannot do ayahuasca. So that medical form is super important.
Yeah, quickly speak to antidepressants combined with MDMA. What would be the concern there?
The concern is that the MDMA doesn't work, that the receptors have been blocked. So you're not going to have a feeling. What then happens is people sometimes say, well, give me more MDMA. And then you can push your serotonin levels up too high and get something called serotonin syndrome, which is not ideal. We want to avoid that.
You don't want to have the medical doctor on call. No, that would not be, I would say that would be a bad trip.
That's a bad trip. So that's your source and set. And then setting is just physically.
Can I add one more thing? To the medical intake? Because I think this is important too, is, the research is showing that if there's any history of psychosis or bipolar, that's also not indicative of a good fit, that we want to be careful of. And this is something that you and I might not get into, but I imagine John, when he interviews you, is going to talk a little bit more about. He's been doing some interesting conversations on unattached burdens that could be things that come into our consciousness when we're in different levels of consciousness, and how with unhealed traumas, what might be some negative energies that could sneak their way in. Another phrase I've heard is sneaker inners. But really being mindful of the mental health of the person as well, for what is a safe and really mindful setting around. We are altering levels of consciousness, and we want to be very aware of what we're opening up and how to, in a healthy and clean way, keep it healthy and safe for everyone involved.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, I personally tried not to use the word safe. I try to say risk reduction. All drugs
I love that.
have a danger profile. And again, it's all relative. Alcohol
Sure.
is still by far the most dangerous drug for self and others, and mushrooms would be on the opposite end of that chart. I do want to jump on one thing that you said, though. The research has excluded people because it's hard to do psychedelic research. So they have said, okay, if you have 1 degree of family member who has schizophrenia, bipolar, we're not going to accept you into the research. If you have any history of bipolar, we're not going to take you into the research. There are a number of medical people who will say that doesn't really mean you should be excluded from using a psychedelic, but more caution should be taken. So the person I always refer people to is spiritpharmacist.com. Dr. Ben Malcolm. He's a PharmD, and he is a specialist in the psychopharmacology of psychedelics. And he does consultations with people all over the country every day. And he's a good resource. And there's not just, I'm just picking him, but there's others who can look at your history, look at what you're on, and talk about it. And he also has a free guide to tapering. So for those who are on antidepressants and will choose to get off, he's got a guide that he can give you that you can then work with your local doctor to help you very, very slowly and methodically remove that other substance from your body, so that you can either live without any medicine or choose to maybe try some of these psychedelics that we're talking about. But spiritpharmacist.com, it's just a tremendous resource.
That's wonderful. So in my own experience, it's been helpful. And I know some of the work that's being done out there is combining MDMA and psilocybin for a journey. Can you speak to the benefits? I know personally why it feels beneficial and my experience of it, and quite a bit of the research, but can you share for those who are combining the two of why would we do that?
Yeah. So 2 different ways you can combine it. There's stacking, which is what I believe you're referring to, where in the same day, you're going to have a psilocybin taking the longest, it'll be the longest acting drug, and MDMA as an overlay. And what the research shows is, for many people, it increases it opens your heart while you're going deep. It decreases some of the more challenging experiences on the psilocybin, and it can smooth the whole experience nicely. So there are many people doing it. There's not as much research on combining, because again, it's been hard to even get to do 1 at a time, let alone 2. But the personal antidotes for that combination are tremendous. I know in the ceremonial space, in a lot of the ceremonies that I participate in, it's multi-day. And on day 1, you would do either MDMA or sassafras MDA. So you have kind of a practice round, and you get used to ceremony, you get used to the people in the room, you get used to opening your heart, you get used to surrendering, you get used to breathing. And then the second day is a psilocybin day. And at that point, people go really deep because they're trusting in the medicine, they're trusting in the facilitator. The fear that they came into the experience is radically decreased. And in the ceremonial space, we've seen really beautiful results with 1 day and then the next day. So either way, it's a lovely combination. And people are doing it also with LSD, and then they're also using ketamine instead of MDMA. So you have lots of options for different purposes.
Yeah. I have felt from my personal experiences, when doing the MDMA with the psilocybin creates a bit more of a euphoric trip or journey. That doesn't mean it is not beneficial or still not experientially healing to do just one. But combining it has felt really powerful. And that heart opening piece is really and I love how you named it. It's not, it's the heart opening love to self first. And that's where we can easily get stuck in so many of our relational challenges, is projecting and externalizing what we feel lack of within our own self. So, we talk about the benefit of that heart opening. Even when we go really, really deep, it feels really lovely to have that baseline of self-love, interconnectivity. So moving on up the tier there after psilocybin.
Then people, what would I do next? I think a lot of people these days, I hear a lot of talk about ayahuasca. There's a number of retreats that are marketing to Americans in Mexico, psilocybin, by the way, the other reason it's more accessible is psilocybin retreats in Mexico, the Netherlands, Jamaica. I think Gwyneth Paltrow did a special on a psilocybin thing. So there's a lot of buzz about psilocybin.
There was recently a CNN special that Anderson Cooper's 360. They did a journey in Jamaica.
Okay.
And they followed a handful of people, and even the reporter did the journey. And so it wasn't Anderson Cooper. I would have liked to see Anderson Cooper on mushrooms.
That
if
sounds
someone's
great.
listening at CNN, that's the follow-up I want to hear.
I'm uploading that idea. Yes.
Yeah,
but
just seeing how funny he is on New Year's when he's drunk.
Exactly. That'd be so funny.
Him and Andy Cohen on mushrooms.
Can you imagine? That'd be the best New Year's special ever.
I think we should lobby for that, Matt.
I think so. I'm writing the fan letter next. So ayahuasca is getting a lot of buzz. There's a quarterback named Aaron Rodgers who talked about his experience. Tim Ferriss, a very popular podcaster, author, has talked about his experience. And then there's some retreats that are decent size that have a marketing budget, and they're marketing to Americans. So there are Americans doing tourism. I call it a psychedelic tourism to these other parts of the world to experience ayahuasca retreats. Colombia, Peru, Brazil are probably the big ones. Costa Rica, of course. And then Mexico has some. It's a much more physical psychedelic. So with ayahuasca, ayahuasca.
That's always stopped me from wanting to do it. I'm going to be honest. That has felt like a big barrier.
Has it?
Then I can question, what am I holding in? What am I afraid to let go of if I don't want to sit there and purge for hours?
I don't love throwing up, and I was terrified. The idea that I'm gonna, at best, throw up and maybe worse, and have both sides. Was super scary. It was interesting that Taita's wife on the first ayahuasca journey that I did said to me, "You're gonna find out that the purging's the best part."
Wow.
I was like, "You're out of your mind." Like, you don't understand how much I don't like to purge. In many ways, she was right. It was beautiful. So in my experience, you take this medicine, about an hour later, the snake or the whatever starts to sit on your chest, and you start going into this other world. And shortly thereafter, you have some type of vision, and you purge into a bucket, and you have something you've released into the bucket that you can see. You go, wow, I just got rid of this prejudice or this whatever it was. And then in my experience, it's a one-time purge, and then you continue on your journey for another 4 or 5 hours. It is incredibly deep. It is not as precise as like with psilocybin and ketamine and MDMA. Your guide is probably measuring a dose that it's
you know what you're doing. There's a little bit of science behind what you're getting. Yeah.
With ayahuasca, it's these glasses of tea, and everybody kind of takes one, and then a little bit later you might take another, and a little bit later you might take a third. But it's definitely it's intense. It's physical. There are some ayahuasca retreats that are during the day. There's others that are all night retreats. The ones I've done are kind of all nighters. So you're just tired. You've been up all night. You've maybe got a couple hours of sleep. You've had a little bit to eat in the morning. You've napped a little bit in the afternoon. You've started again.
Wow. Sounds exhausting mentally, emotionally, and physically.
All of the above.
And spiritually, I imagine.
And you're typically doing it 2 or 3 times in a row or over 4 days, maybe skip one. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
That's
But
intense.
for I mean, there's amazing work being done with veterans where they're taking them down to Costa Rica and Colombia and Peru, and they're using ayahuasca for PTSD and having
Mm-hmm.
incredible results. There's if you're looking to donate to a group, Heroic Hearts is an incredible organization. They're seen them in the New York Times. They're always raising money because the wait list of veterans who want to do this versus can do this is they just don't have as anyone who's looking to donate for a veterans oriented group. That's a great one. Vets is another one that's doing great work. But yeah, ayahuasca is the next one. It's, at least in my experience, there are people who do ayahuasca do it much, much less frequently than other
Yeah.
medicines. Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah, it seems like that could even for some people just be a one-time experience and they've kind of checked that box. For something like psilocybin and MDMA, you mentioned with ketamine how the frequency, you might be 4 to 6 sessions, every 4 to 6 weeks. Is there, now again, we're not looking at it from a scientific model for healing versus the difference of recreational use just for funsies, which, you know, again, goes back to source, set, and setting of when we get to the healing aspects. Because I know people who have recreationally used these medicines and not had the healing aspects. And I think it with an absence of that set and setting of what's the intention and how we're engaging with it afterwards, also with the integrations, which we haven't talked about yet. But is there, from your research and experience, an ideal usage for MDMA and psilocybin, and or one that might be too much, that might be not recommended?
So this is a super tricky question because we get into the research doesn't do this. The research isn't giving people multiple doses of psilocybin over extended periods of time. They have done that with MDMA, and there is an issue with MDMA where you have kind of receptors in your brain. If you take too much MDMA close together, you can kind of burn out those receptors. So that's one you definitely want to be careful of.
And I do want to say with that, you know, one of the ways to help your brain from that depletion you can feel afterwards is there's different supplements and vitamins that can balance that. So I know when we do it, we're always taking vitamin C, vitamin B, and a couple of others.
5-HTP,
Yes,
magnesium. Yeah.
exactly. And even if, you know, at the end of that day, I might feel a little depleted because I'll take the vitamins at the same time or soon after. I might, you know, take another vitamin C and vitamin B, and then again the next. So we're wanting to support that depletion. And so it's not just you're going to get depleted, and so the vitamin does help counterbalance that.
Yep, absolutely. So MDMA is one to be, yes, you can do things to support the depletion, and you have your receptors that you have to watch out for, and just be aware of in terms of frequency. There's a lot of recreational use that's been studied where people have essentially burned out their receptors where they've had to take more and more MDMA to get the effect. And yeah, that's not ideal. Psilocybin, again, it's been used ceremonially for a long time. And so this is where it becomes a very personal decision. There are people who are using these medicines because they want to connect with the divine. So how often do you want to have that kind of deeper connection with the divine? And then there's people who are certainly doing this a microdose. So we're not
that was a whole other thing that I was going to come back to. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're talking about a 10th to a 20th of a dose, and they're doing it 3-4 times a week for about a month at a time, and then taking a couple of weeks off typically. And that seems to be okay. Again, there's not a lot of long-term studies, so I'm saying all that with a grain of salt. But there's been a lot of indigenous use of psilocybin for many, many, many years. And yeah, it seems like that's probably a pretty safe one to do more regularly. Although, just last thing on this, it is an anti-addictive medicine, meaning you give an animal a choice between food and cocaine, they're going to take cocaine. You give them food and mushrooms, they're going to take the food. So this is one where you really can regulate based on yourself and when you think you need this for the purpose that you're driving for.
I want to add on one quick thing. You talked about microdosing. Is the dosage is so small that you're not getting a psychoactive effect. it's just doing the brain support and you're getting the benefits over time. Because some people, I think, say, oh, I do mushrooms, I microdose, but you may not be having the same experience if you're doing, a 6-hour journey. So I just wanted to qualify that for people who are listening and not really sure, well, what does that term even mean? And the microdosing generally is in a pill form, right? So it's like taking another vitamin.
Absolutely. We talk about either being sub-perceptual or sub-intoxicating. You can certainly go on your whole day once you've dialed in your dose. But for those who are starting out with microdosing, do it on a Saturday to make sure the dose is correct versus doing it at work. But we could probably spend an hour on microdosing.
Right, of course. And maybe one day we'll have you back on and we will.
There we go.
I just want to ask in your personal opinion, because I've heard different responses of, for those who are doing, like, just sticking with the MDMA and psilocybin as the healing journey as far as frequency. I've heard anywhere, maybe once every 3 months, or, at most once a month. I don't think doing more than that from what I've learned and understood. Would you agree with those timeframes just from your own experience and research?
I think there's a lot of people who believe in that quarterly program. And I think in MDMA, from what I've heard, MDMA and psilocybin on a quarterly basis seems reasonable. On a monthly basis, that might be a lot of MDMA, but probably okay on psilocybin.
Yeah. Good to know. All right. I think, are we up to LSD?
So LSD, again, super powerful. It was Bill W., founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wanted LSD to be part of the Alcoholics Anonymous program. He did not win that discussion within his organization, but it was his idea was a 12-step program begins with giving yourself to a higher power. And he believed that LSD is a forced spiritual experience, that you will come away knowing that there's more to the world than you, and that would be good for people to experience. There is a
That's
province.
Fascinating. I did not know that.
Fascinating. Amazing.
That is absolutely fascinating. Okay, I have another question, but finish your sentence first, or your few next sentences.
But it is counterintuitive to think I have a substance use challenge. I'm going to use another substance to fight that challenge.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in with my question, because this is a question that I've had with many people, including clients who are curious about a psychedelic healing journey, but who are in sobriety for alcohol and or drugs, and have the fear of two things. One, am I still going to be considered sober? And secondly, is there, and I haven't found research on this yet, so if you have, I would love to know, is my psychedelic experience going to activate the pleasure part of my brain that thinks or mimics the sensation of being high, that will now trigger a higher desire to go back to usage? Now, I've seen the research around the alcoholism, and even you just said, I didn't even have the desire. That wasn't even my intention with psilocybin. But this feels like a gray area for those who have spent years in AA, years in recovery, subscribe to, I have a disease. This is, bigger than me. This is a very, to me, feels very personal, but ethical question of a gray area. So can you speak to that? It is,
but it's also interesting, and I'm just latching onto one thing you said, which is, will I still be considered sober? And one of the things for me in psychedelics is the pulling forward the inner wisdom and not looking for external validation. And we all know in all the 12-step programs, again, 12-step programs are amazing for a lot of people, incredible. And we know there's infighting, and we know there's people who have very definite beliefs on what's okay and not okay within those programs. So I don't know if at any given meeting, someone's going to consider you sober or not sober. My question for you is, what do you consider yourself, whoever that person is?
And for some people, it may not be you, but it may be your family members who are very protective of your sobriety or fearful of a quote lack of sobriety and what that looks like.
Yep. And then I can only point to the research that people who are using or have used psychedelics to curb substance and behavioral use challenges have had marked success. I don't believe that the things that are being triggered in the brain are the same things that are triggered with alcohol. Using that as an example, or heroin, using that as an example. And I would, again, I know this is such a touchy subject. As the 12-step program, it's a spiritual path wrapped around a common challenge. It feels to me that when you're saying I've given myself to higher power, I want direct religious experience, that using the technology available with psychedelics can give direct religious experience. So using it not because we're going out and we're trying to escape the world, we're using it because I want to be more into the world. I want to be more connected. I want to understand. I want to understand differently. So
and I think that's a beautiful description of psychedelics overall. I'm not doing this to escape myself or my problems. I'm doing this to go into myself and understand my relationship to my challenges, the source of it, heal it. I believe it's going to take some time as more of these medicines become legal and hopefully more mainstream for healing, that the language around, or the rigid view around what the war on drugs did for us, begins to shape a new mindset culturally, sociologically, in the medical field. And I see it trending that way, but I think it's going to take some rewiring of belief systems and patterns. So really anyone who is stuck on this belief, really should just do psychedelics to let go of the old belief, and the solution.
In our, we have a Puritan society culture. And we are completely comfortable with preaching morals. We're completely comfortable with telling women what they can and can't do with their bodies. And we are completely comfortable medically sedating people because they don't fit into society norms. And that's tough. So David Bronner from Bronner's Soap talks about kind of a unified field. He said, look, there are people who want to meet this medicine in a medical model. Good for them. Let's make that available. And there are other people who believe that plants shouldn't be illegal, period. And no adult should tell another adult what they can or can't ingest when it comes to consciousness. And they don't need to have an intention. They can do whatever they want. And that's the decriminalization movement. And that should be allowed to coexist. And then there's others that say, I'm doing this with deep intention and deep religious belief. And I've never got into this level of exploration of my consciousness without these medicines. And I should be allowed to do this as a First Amendment issue. And that should be allowed. So 3 different ways of people meeting the medicine. My instinct is that the end result is you all meet at the same place, which is you are loved, you are enough, and you are connected. But how you get to that place, people take different paths, and that's okay. But I know I have to check myself because, again, I grew up believing that campaign. I have that inherent bias of, oh, wait a minute, it's not okay to do this for fun, but it is okay to do this with intention. Really? There's a great book, Dr. Carl Hart's Drug Use for Grown-Ups. Highly recommended when it comes to this particular topic we're on right now.
Let's finish off, and by the way, I love everything you just said. Let's just finish off with the LSD experience. And I think I'm going to offer you an invitation, Matt, because I am enjoying this conversation so much. And I want to be mindful of our listener of how much this is to take in. And I'd like to invite you back to come on a second time, because I think there's so much more that we can share that I don't want to cram it in. I want to actually give it its proper space, because I do want to explain. I mean, we've done such a great job of going through the experiential piece and the power of the healing. But I think people also in our Western culture want to understand, okay, but what's it actually doing in the brain? You know, what's actually happening, because it's because of that research that it is becoming more legal. And it's, you know, I lead with spirituality first, and I appreciate the science backing it up, right? So I'm going to lead with spirituality and hold the space for both. Both are necessary in our Western modern world. So would you be willing to come on a second time to touch that whole second part? Because I don't want to rush it. And I love this conversation. And so let's finish off with the experience of LSD. That is not one that I have not done that. So, and I have not also done ayahuasca. I'm still on the fence about that one. I think one day I will. I'm just not there yet.
What about
But
Bufo for you?
I don't even know what that one is, to be
Oh,
honest.
let's do that instead of LSD then. We'll come back into
Okay.
LSD.
Okay, great, great, great.
So Bufo is
But
otherwise
will you
known as
spell that, please?
Buffo, I think.
Buffo. Okay.
Let me just make sure. Or is it Bufo? Hang on. Now I'm forgetting. Bufo. There we go. My bad.
Okay.
One F. Bufo. All right. So we're talking about the Bufo alvarius toad, or the Sonoran desert toad.
Is this the DMT
It has
or
DMT in
DMT?
it.
Well, I know a lot of this has DMT as a basis.
So this is
Okay.
called 5-MeO DMT, completely different than DMT. DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. 5-MeO DMT just has the same initials, but it's completely different.
Okay.
We call this the God molecule.
Hmm.
You can take so two different ways you can take this. There is a synthetic where they've synthesized the compound, and you can take the venom of the Sonoran desert toad that they dry, crystallize, and you inhale.
This is one of those things, Matt. I'm like, who decided to do this? Like, says,
Right.
I'm going to take the
Who
venom from
figures
the
this out?
Sonoran desert toad and crystallize it and then take it in the hopes that maybe I'll have a psychedelic experience. Like, I just am curious. Like, who decided to do that for the first time?
There's a huge controversy around that. That's actually very funny. There's a Hamilton Morris episode where someone who had claimed to be the Western founder of this was tricked him. And then there was a follow-up where he basically said, well, that's not really how it happened. But there's definitely indigenous use, and then there was a Western kind of crossover. Who knows how it happened?
Okay.
But it is
it's
what
here
is
now.
wild. Here's what happens with Bufo. You inhale this thing. They count down from 10 backwards. At about 7, you're gone. And when I say gone, this isn't like a 45-minute journey up with psilocybin where it kind of smoothly moves you into the Netherlands. You have disappeared.
So complete ego death pretty quickly.
And that's the other thing. You can take psilocybin and you might or might not have an ego death. When you take Bufo, you dissolve into the universe. There is no you, there is no earth, there is no time. There is just you in this other world. And it is, I knew what my low end of my emotional register was with my mom dying. That was as sad as I've ever been. And I thought I knew what my high end. I've had 2 beautiful children. I've been married for 24 years. I've had a great life. And I was just wrong. I had no idea what I was capable of on the high end.
Wow.
And so incredibly beautiful. Again, not for everybody, and it's not where I would start. But it is a incredibly powerful medicine. The joke in the people who work in this space is that there are no atheists who emerge after experiencing Bufo.
It kills all atheists.
It kills all atheists. So it's it is getting more used because it's powerful. There's more research being done because it's short, and that fits more into a medical model.
How long does the experience last?
10 to 20 minutes.
That's it.
That's it. But
so you have this ego death and you're reborn within 20 minutes, and you can then continue to integrate it.
And there's a lot of integration. Yeah, it can truly change. So much happens so quickly that the integration, which we didn't really spend a lot of time on.
I'm making notes of what we're going to do on our next one, so I don't miss out on the things, because there's a lot of follow-up to all of this, and integration, because it's not just a one and done, right? To be properly doing this for healing purposes and to integrate what we experienced, what we received, the downloads, the connections, the rewiring of those beliefs and behaviors, that's where the real therapeutic, I think, to me, the therapeutic gold is in the processing and integration afterwards.
And it becomes a mindfulness practice. If we don't write it down and we don't integrate, we forget and we don't pay attention. So it's that's another medicine that's becoming more and more popular. Again, when let's next time talk about how do you find a good guide versus a not good guide? But make sure if you're going to do this medicine, get some references, check who is your facilitator on this, and make sure you are comfortable with the rules of engagement. You are completely in all of these medicines, you're in a vulnerable state. So
Right.
just you've got to keep yourself safe. That's why on the medical side, many of people are saying have a male and a female in the room as a facilitator. And I would tell you on the ceremonial side, balance that energy, have two sets of eyes, at least two sets of eyes. And any of the ceremonies I'm in typically have two facilitators, male and female, upwards of 4 musicians who are all trained as guides, and sitters on top of that. You have people in non-ordinary states.
Want support.
You need support.
Yeah, you need support. Matt, we're going to talk again very soon because there's too much here to just end. And I love not only the wealth of your knowledge and experience, but the simplicity and clarity in which you describe it, name it, explain it, because we're talking about complex experiences. And I don't want to overly simplify it and distill it down into simple terms, because I don't want to disrespect and negate the impact and power that the medicine offers. And yet to take something of another level consciousness and bring it into our everyday language, you do quite beautifully. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It is a treat to talk to somebody who has not only done work on herself and the personal work, but has worked with individuals and with couples in not using the medicine and using the medicine. And there's a place for all of it. There's a place for the breath work. There's a place for the yoga. There's a place for the exercise. There's a place for the eating healthy. There's a place for the sleep. And there's a place for this psychedelic technology.
Yeah. And I'm thrilled. I see this as a revolutionary piece in people's healing and ultimately happiness.
Yeah.
And to counteract that, epidemic of loneliness and depression. And, I've got 2 teenage daughters, and they of course know of my experience with the medicine and the ability for it to heal me and my relationship. And that this is definitely a piece of my career going forward. And it's just not like the family joke, or it's like, mushrooms are the answer to everything. I used to think mindfulness was the answer to everything. And now it's the joke. I'm like, okay, well, actually mushrooms and mindfulness, and
let's talk about intergenerational and family journeying together in the next one. I've had some incredible experiences, and personally, and been able to witness some incredible experiences with family.
And I've seen it as well, in which some parents and children have done work together. And that's something I'm very open to as well. I think there's, we all just want to feel healed. And like you said, we want to feel loved. We want to feel worthy. We want to feel seen. And it starts with our ability to do that for ourselves. And life gets in the way of that. And it doesn't have to be this hard. And luckily, we have now additional resources to access that level of healing. And hopefully this psychedelic renaissance can really put an end to that just say no, and to say, not just say no, but be mindful of what you decide to do. Understand what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, if I had my choice for my sister, for my wife, for my daughter, for my son, I'm a proponent of responsible psychedelic use with all the things we're talking about. And I try to hold a place for, but it's not my place to tell anybody how to do it. So I'm going to try to give the best practices I know how. And if that speaks to whoever's listening, this can help reduce the risk and increase the probability of good outcomes.
I love it, Matt. Where can people find you? I know you're coming back on again, but let's just make sure we give you the proper shout out for people to find how to get your books or learn more from you.
Thank you. So Psychedelics for Everyone is the book. And obviously, as we've talked about, they're not for everyone to take, but they're good for the world. Everywhere books are sold. There's an Audible version of that is also a lot of fun, where the pieces I read, pieces that women wrote, women read. It's
awesome.
a fun book. The journal, Beyond the Trip, is available on Amazon. And then mattzemon.com has lots of little videos. You can get a free guide to microdosing. And then LinkedIn and Instagram is where I spend a ton of time. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer questions. I'm
beautiful.
So just don't be shy.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, I'm so grateful that we are now connected and going forth. Hope to be resources and shared information for one another as we support many people on a healing journey.
Would love that.
To all of you listening, this was an absolute wealth of information, and there will be more to come. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If this spoke to you and you feel like more people want to journey forward with psychedelics for healing, then please give this episode a rating, a review, a share, so we can really help spread the word and really support healing and health and happiness, because we also desperately, and our world so desperately needs it. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you all take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat, visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.